Hello, and welcome to another episode of It's a History Podcast. I am your host, Madison, and this week we are going to be looking at Heinrich Schliemann. I had mentioned him in last week's episode when discussing the labyrinth, and after his brief mention, I have just been remembering the absolute rage my professor in one of my first classes on ancient Rome had towards this man. So in honor of her and her rage that she passed on to all of her students, we are going to look at Heinrich and the impact he has had on archaeology and history. Let's start with who Heinrich was. Heinrich was born January 6, 1822 in Germany as the fifth of 9 children to his mother Louise and his father Ernest. Heinrich's family was poor, and when his mother died when he was 9, his father sent him away to live with his uncle Friedrich. As a young boy, Heinrich's lifelong interest in history had been ignited by his father's knowledge of the Iliad and the Odyssey. He attended grammar school for just 3 months when he was 11, and he eventually went to a vocational school, but due to his family's financial status, he was not able to attend a university. This would cause a rift between Heinrich and the archaeologist he would interact with, who had gone to university later in his life. As an older teenager, Heinrich worked as an apprentice at Herr Holt's grocery, where he would work for 5 years before receiving an injury on the job site, leading to his departure from the grocery business. He had gotten hurt lifting a heavy barrel, which ended up hurting his chest, and he coughed up blood. In 1841, he became a cabin boy on the Dorothea, which after 12 days at sea, the ship foundered in a gale, which means that the boat sank in a storm, where winds were between 39 and 54 miles an hour. The survivors of the wreckage washed up on the shores of the Netherlands, and our subject today was one of them. After this experience, Heinrich stayed at more low-key jobs like office attendant and bookkeeper, and I don't blame him. After the boat incident and his time of quiet office jobs, he moved on to the import-export business at just 22 years old. Within his time working for the import-export business, he learned many languages as a natural polyglot, which refers to someone who knows 5 or more languages, and boy, did Heinrich claim to know quite a few languages. By the time Heinrich's life came to a close, he could comfortably converse in English, French, Dutch, Spanish, Portuguese, Italian, Russian, Swedish, Polish, Greek, Latin, Arabic, and his native German. According to Heinrich, it only took him 6 weeks to learn a new language, and this ability to quickly immerse himself within a new language was very helpful in the art of business. After learning of the death of one of his brothers in 1850, Heinrich made his way to California just before California was made the 31st state, to continue in his brother's work during the gold rush. Heinrich's brother had been a speculator in California, which pretty much meant that instead of getting into the crazy competitive world of gold mining, he instead invested in businesses surrounding the gold rush. The goal was to make money through the major influx of people, not so much the mining of the gold itself. Heinrich, in the same vein as his brother, started a bank in Sacramento where he bought and sold over $1 million worth of gold dust in just 6 months. When some complaints about being shorted started to arise, Heinrich quickly left the area claiming to have been ill, but he stayed in California long enough to apparently witness the Sacramento fire, even going so far to publish an eyewitness account of the fire. In 1852, he sold his banking business and headed off to Russia, where he attempted to live the life of a gentleman. He also met the woman who he would marry, Katerina Petrovna Lyshin. He married her just 5 months after arriving in Russia. They had 3 children together, but Heinrich and Katerina were very rarely in the same place. After threatening divorce twice, Heinrich traveled back to the US, where in 1869 he bought property in Indianapolis and lived there for 3 months before he was able to utilize the rather lax divorce law of Indiana. He lied about his intentions to stay in the state and was granted his divorce. He married again 2 months later after his friend helped Heinrich to find someone who was, quote, as enthusiastic about Homer and about the rebirth of beloved Greece with a Greek name and a soul impassioned for learning. The girl in question would be a 17-year-old Sophia Gastromenos. The pair would go on to have 2 children who they gave the very Greek names of Andromache and Agamemnon. And Sophia did actually play a rather big role in his eventual quest to find the city of Troy. By the time Heinrich was 36 years old, he had amassed a wealth that would have been enough for him to retire. But Heinrich did not retire. Instead, this is when he decided to go back to his interest in history in pursuit of the city of Troy. As mentioned earlier, Heinrich was not a trained archaeologist. So with that, let's jump into Heinrich's next career as an amateur archaeologist. Heinrich's obsession with Greek and Roman history had never faded as he grew up, and now as a wealthy man, he was able to do pretty much whatever he wanted. In 1868, he visited sites in Greece and made the assertion that Hisarlik was the site of the ancient city of Troy. He wrote a book about this claim and submitted the book as a dissertation to the University of Rostock. He was actually awarded a PhD in absentia for this dissertation. He was very interested in locating the lost city of Troy and began excavating at a site where it was commonly believed to be the site of the city. The site had originally been excavated by a fellow amateur archaeologist named Frank Calvert. After some initial work from Heinrich, he was dissatisfied with his findings, and after Calvert identified Hisarlik, the area's modern name, which was located in the Ottoman Empire as the time Heinrich was excavating, as the area where the ancient city of Troy once laid. Heinrich was skeptical of this identification, but after some further persuading by Calvert, Heinrich started his dig. In 1870, Heinrich had started to dig what is now referred to as the Schliemann Trench, and discovered 9 buried cities. He dug down more than 50 feet to where he thought the city of Troy would be located. He did not work to preserve any of the layers on his way down, essentially destroying everything in his path. After 3 years of digging, not preserving, he discovered gold that is thought to be Priam's treasure, Priam having been the legendary king of Troy, in what has been now classified as a city older than Troy, as the time that this layer has been dated to is too far back to be attributed to Homer's Trojan Wars. Heinrich would smuggle this found treasure outside of the Ottoman Empire into Greece, where he would actually be sued by the Ottoman Empire, and Heinrich was forced to pay 10,000 gold francs. As a wealthy man, Heinrich sent an additional 50,000 gold francs to the Constantinople Imperial Museum and pretty much voided out his theft and was allowed to perform further excavations at the site. In 1874, Heinrich published a book titled Troy and Its Remains, and also offered his collections from the excavation to the Greek government, the French government, and then finally the Russian government. Heinrich's collection contained approximately 10,000 individual items, including ceramic vessels, metal implements, among other items. In the early 1880s, the collection made its way to Berlin, where it would be up until World War II. During the Second World War, the Nazis raided many museums and stole quite a bit of art. The collection had been protected until the crates that contained the collection were taken by Soviet forces in 1945. It wouldn't be until 1994 that a museum in Russia actually admitted that they had the collection in their possession. Heinrich would revisit the site to perform a total of 8 excavations. Heinrich died in 1890 at the age of 68 due to effects of an ear infection. He was buried by his friends at the first cemetery in Athens in a mausoleum that is shaped in ancient Greek style with a frieze circling the outside that actually shows Heinrich conducting his excavations. As more modern-day archaeologists examined the site that Heinrich excavated and looked closer at the layer of the dig that he claimed to be Troy, and after a more extensive examination, the layer that Heinrich stated was the city of Troy of the Trojan War was hundreds of years older than the actual city of Troy he was looking for. Heinrich had excavated through the original city of Troy while working his way down. As Heinrich was not a trained professional, his excavations had destroyed what remained of the ancient city of Troy. His method of excavation has been described as savage and brutal, and the area where he performed his excavation is still referred to as Schliemann's Trench. You may have noticed my use of apparently, claim, according to, and other words of this nature when describing what Heinrich did or had claimed to have done over the course of his life. Yes, while true that he did do many things throughout his life, there are some things that may be exaggerations of the truth, or things that were simply made up. He was an extensive note and diary writer, and he often did so in various languages, so his rather extensive personal records were not explored in depth until somewhat recently. The fact that he wrote in many different languages made it difficult for any one person to translate his records. He often wrote in exaggerations or of events that did not happen, such as him meeting President Millard Fillmore, or actually being present at the Sacramento fire, or how his wife Sophia aided in smuggling treasures out of the dig site. When it does come to the treasure that Heinrich discovered, referring to Priam's treasure, it has been suggested on more than one occasion that this treasure is actually a collection of multiple artifacts from different time periods. The fact that this collection was missing for nearly 50 years before the Russian authorities revealed that the treasure was in their hands led to much speculation that the artifacts themselves had been melted down or sold on the black market, or even held in a private collection somewhere. There is also the matter of the Mask of Agamemnon that Heinrich discovered. The mask itself was discovered at a site he was working on in Mycenae, but it has since come out After a deeper look into his diaries and personal records, that just before he discovered this mask on site, he visited France, where he had previously asked a close friend to locate a goldsmith in France who would be willing to work without putting his personal seal on the metal, which was illegal to do. Then there is also how the mask actually looks. The Mask of Agamemnon would be considered a death mask, a mask made of the face after death. But the face in question has a handlebar mustache that is not time period appropriate. There are thoughts that perhaps it is actually the death mask of Agamemnon, but Heinrich accentuated some of the features to make it look more in style for the time period he lived in. If this did in fact come out to be a counterfeit, it would cause quite an uproar within the archaeological community. The Greek government has not allowed any testing to be done on the mask, as the mask is a driver for tourism, and the Greek government claims that the testing could result in extensive damage to the mask. When it comes down to it, Heinrich plays an interesting role in the history of the discovery of these ancient cities, as well as how the active archaeological digs actually happen. Heinrich was untrained in a rather newish area of study, but he did make some rather important discoveries. For much of written history, the ancient city of Troy was largely considered to be a myth, and Heinrich pretty much proved that it did in fact exist. Did he also destroy a good portion of the actual city? Also, yes. And we must also consider the city of Troy that was discovered. All of Heinrich's clues as to where he would find the city came from Homer, who recorded many of the stories told throughout ancient Greece as oral stories in written words. His epics are recounts of events that happened centuries before his lifetime. It is impossible to know to what extent any truth lies within Homer's epics. At the end of the day, what Heinrich discovered was in fact evidence of multiple cities laying on top of one another over the span of thousands of years. Could it possibly actually be the ancient city of Troy? Maybe. Archaeology is still a rather new in the context of human history sector of historical record keeping. And while we are still advancing in how we retain these historical sites and how we interpret what they mean to us in the context of the time period which they are to be from, we are continually discovering more and more about our ancient ancestors. We can only go on the information we have, and as new discoveries are made, we can look at how they correlate with what we know and what we think we know. And that's where I'm going to wrap up today's episode. Sources for today's episode include an article titled The World of Schliemann, His Life, His Discoveries, His Legacy, written by James Simon Galeri, and a presentation from a History and Civilizations course written by Professor Mark Damen. Thank you for listening to today's episode. If you liked what you heard, please head over to Spotify or Apple Podcasts and leave a review. If you have any questions, comments, or topic ideas, you can email me at itsahistorypodcast@gmail.com. You can also find me on Instagram and Threads at It's a History Podcast. Thank you again for listening to today's episode, and I hope to have you in the next one.